Hello and a very good morning. You're watching the Breakfast News on Rajya Sabha television with me, Frank Pereira. Let's begin as always with the latest headlines. Anger mounts over Taliban's massacre of children. Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif pledges to pursue terrorists beyond country's borders. Parliament condemns Taliban attack. Security alert in India ahead of US President Obama's visit. US and Cuba end 50 years of hostilities. US President Barack Obama announces resumption of diplomatic ties. Cabinet clears constitutional amendment bill to bring in new GST regime. Decision paves way for bill to be brought in current session. All set for GSLV Mark 3 launch from Sriharikota. It will be the first experimental flight of India's latest generation launch vehicle. Let's begin with news from Pakistan. 2 days after the 132 brutal child murders by the Pakistani Taliban in a Peshawar school, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has announced a national plan to combat terrorism. He said there will be no distinction between good and bad Taliban from now on. Here are the details.
A day after 132 innocent students were massacred by the Taliban, Pakistan is determined that it won't be business as usual in the war against terror.
हम इस बात का भी वाज़ेह ऐलान करते हैं कि अच्छे और बुरे तालिबान की कोई तमीज़ किसी सतह पर रवा नहीं रखी जाएगी। आज हमारी कौमी क़यादत ने अज़्म और इस्तिक़लाल के इसी अहद को दोहराते हुए ये तय किया है कि मुकम्मल अज़्म और यकसुई के साथ इस जंग को उस वक्त तक जारी रखेंगे जब तक हमारी सरजमीन पर एक भी दहशतगर्द बाकी है।
Pakistan also lifted its self-imposed moratorium on death penalty in terror-related cases. The moratorium was imposed in 2008. Over 8,000 prisoners are on death row in Pakistan. About 10% of them are guilty of offences labelled under terrorism.
Those murders which are based on personal vendetta, animosity based on some dispute on woman or property, etc., they might be treated at a different level. And those accused person who were involved in a terrorist attack, they will be probably treated at a different level. And the first turn, which will come, and they will be probably executed. They will be the person who were convicted in on the terrorist offences.
Pakistan's main opposition party leader Imran Khan has also called off his 4-month-long protest in Islamabad. Imran had alleged rigging in last year's elections. Imran now says he wants to help the government focus to fight against terrorism. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, India also joined Pakistan in mourning over the Tuesday's tragedy, but there is scare over security arrangements in schools back home. Home Minister Rajnath Singh has asked all state governments to step up security. Amid all this, there's fresh intelligence input of a possible terror strike during US President Barack Obama's India visit next month. Here's more.
Schools across India observed 2-minute silence on Wednesday after an appeal from Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Prayers, protests and vigils were held in many places against the ghastly terror strike in Pakistan. Both houses of parliament also mourned the victims of the tragedy.
This senseless and brutal, cowardly act is deplorable. The loss of innocent lives in this incident is indeed tragic and unfortunate. This incident only reaffirms our resolve to fight terrorism with more determination and firmness.
Home Minister Rajnath Singh has asked all state governments to step up security across all educational institutes to avoid a Peshawar-like siege in India.
बस इतना ही कहूँगा कि सारी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स को एडवाइजरी होम मिनिस्ट्री से जारी कर दी गई।
हम पूरी तरह से सजग हैं। सुरक्षा की जो रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं उसके लिए जो ओवरऑल एनवायरनमेंट को हमेशा मद्देनजर रखा जाता है।
There has been fresh intelligence input that Lashkar militants could strike in India during US President Barack Obama's visit next month. Obama will be in Delhi as a chief guest for the Republic Day celebrations.
See, we always keep in mind the overall security scenario in the country as well as anywhere else in the world, and also we always keep in mind the latest inputs available regarding security situation, and then we ensure that whatever is necessary, that is done.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to his Pak counterpart Nawaz Sharif on Tuesday night. He offered his condolence, assuring all possible help from India in the hour of grief. With inputs from Kriti Mishra and Anu Diwan, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, the cabinet has cleared constitutional amendment bill to bring in new GST regime today. The decision will pave way to table GST as a bill in Parliament in the ongoing session. Here's a detailed report.
The Cabinet has approved the Constitutional Amendment Bill on Goods and Services Tax on Wednesday. The decision paves way for its introduction in ongoing session of Parliament to bring about long-pending indirect tax reforms. The government aims to roll out the GST from 1st of April 2016. The revised Constitutional Amendment Bill was brought before the Cabinet after the centre and states reached a consensus on contentious issues. States which earn over 50% of their revenues from taxes on petrol and other petrol products wanted it to be out of GST so they could continue with levying different tax rates on these products. In the 3 rounds of talks that held last week, states insisted that the compensation part should be included in the Constitutional Amendment Bill.
There will be a payment of 11,000 crores as a partial payment of the CST dues that are due to the various states. And so we are moving forward to actually rebuild trust between centre and the states. And I think that will be demonstrated as well as far as the compensation is concerned when we table the constitutional amendment.
The GST will subsume most of the indirect taxes like excise duty and service tax at the central level and VAT and local levies on the states front. The GST bill was last introduced in the Lok Sabha in 2011 by the then UPA government but lapsed, requiring the new NDA government to come with a new bill. With inputs from Krishnan Tripathi, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, joining me for a chat this morning on this very subject is senior journalist Amanshu Watsu. Very good morning, Amanshu, and thank you for joining us on the program. Well, let's talk about GST now. There's, it's much anticipated. The government has been trying to push the GST, and it's hopeful that the GST will see the light of day in this winter session of Parliament, and we could see it rolled out by April 2016. But what's really going to happen once the GST falls into place? What is the state share going to be, and what is the centre share really going to be?
See, what the GST basically does is it combines various tax under one simple administration. So instead of having an octroi, an entry tax, state sale tax, central sales tax, excise duties, all that will come under one tax. And the other thing it will do is it will create a unified market across the country, so that it doesn't matter whether you are buying a good from Haryana or Kerala or Punjab. It makes business much easier. Now, what it does is, because it unifies all the taxation, it makes evasion much tougher. But at the same time, it also cuts out various irritating tax, like entry tax and various taxes which split up India into different markets. So states have certain concerns that they will lose some of the revenue by removing these taxes. But on the other hand, because it is such an integrated and comprehensive tax, evasion will become much more difficult. So there are many analysts and researchers which show that actual total tax revenue will actually go up. Now, there is a concern of the states that some of their revenue might come down, and that is particularly so in, say, taxation on petrol, petroleum products. So those are points of negotiation where the government has agreed, the central government has agreed that if there is a problem, they will compensate them.
There were reports a few weeks ago stating that the panel has recommended that the rate to GST should be at 27%. Now, isn't that a little too steep? Because countries like Sweden have a GST of about 27%, where they give other facilities free of cost to the citizens.
Yeah, see, we shouldn't compare with a developed country in the rate of taxation. And also, this is just the starting point. You have such a tax rate. It is possible that there is a lot of room to reduce it later, or it may generate such revenue that India could also have much stronger welfare schemes, employee protection schemes, health insurance schemes. So it will be really premature to say if this is too high or too low. But as a starting point, I think the good thing is it is not a higher taxation rate than that developed country.
All right, do stay with us, Himanshu. I'm going to come back to you in just a bit for a reaction on the next story as well. Now, Russia is in a in the grip of a deep financial crisis. Of course, after its steepest fall since the financial crisis of 1998, the Russian ruble stabilized a little on Wednesday. The Central Bank of Russia increased interest rates to stabilize the currency. Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said that there is no reason to panic yet, but many fear the economy is heading towards a greater hit. Here's more.
From 61 to 80 in just a few hours. Russia's currency, the ruble, was in a free fall as the currency lost about 20% of its value on Tuesday. It fell again on Wednesday morning. At one point on Tuesday, the Russian currency tumbled to 80 rubles against the US dollar. It later recovered to 70 rubles to the dollar and later stabilized to around 67 rubles to the dollar and 82 to the euro. The free fall has put policymakers under intense pressure. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev met representatives of the government's finance and economy units and the central bank management to figure a way out of the crisis.
Конечно, мы сталкиваемся с проблемами и вызовами в наших общих интересах, как можно быстрее навести порядок на валютном рынке. Никому, гражданам, ни банкам, ни реальному сектору не нужна такая нестабильность.
The Central Bank of Russia took emergency measures. The bank increased its key rate by 6.5 percentage points to 17%. The hike led to a brief rally in the value of the ruble, but it failed to provide a lasting solution. On Monday too, the central bank had spent about $2 billion in currency interventions. This compares to about $774 million spent during all of November.
И нужно адаптироваться к новым условиям и к новой политике Центрального банка. Мы понимаем, когда у них возникают вопросы, может быть, некоторые недопонимания нашей политики. Мы открыты, будем ее разъяснять, будем больше говорить о наших целях, о наших мерах для того, чтобы такое понимание было.
Довольно-таки нестабильная, волатильная атмосфера. Мне кажется, что многие фундаментальные факторы уже не работают и преобладает паника. Вот, что, наверное, не очень хорошо, и, естественно, в какой-то момент это может с такой же скоростью пойти в обратную сторону, но на текущий момент, конечно, настроение не очень.
But Russians seemed wary of the government's actions.
Ажиотаж надо сбить, нельзя этого делать. Сейчас пойдут все потянутся, сейчас начнут вытаскивать деньги, скупать все. Ну и что? Ну, нам же не хватит ни товарной массы, ничего. И мы все банкроты. Ну, все идет к тому, что американцы хотят, чтобы снять президента.
Ordinary Russians saw this as an opportunity to stock up, with many flocking to stores to snap expensive products. Apple halted sales on its Russian online store. Bureau Report, Sabha TV.
Let's go back to Amanshu Watsu, still with us on the program. Himanshu, I mean, the ruble saw record lows on Tuesday, almost touching 80 to a dollar. But then the Central Bank of Russia took steps immediately, and the currency seems to have bounced back. But what's in store really for the ruble? Do we see it, improving from its current position?
I don't think there's immediate room for much improvement in the ruble's value. See, what Russia has faced is kind of a double attack. One, they have sanctions from the Western countries after their action in Ukraine and other things. So the economy was already under pressure. On top of that, oil and gas is their main export, the biggest export out of Russia, their main source of foreign currency. Now, oil prices, which were around $115 in June, were around $59 last night. So they've almost halved. So the flow of foreign currency into Russia comes down a lot. That, on top of the fact that they are in a hostile relationship with the West, makes it very difficult for them to do anything. The central bank made a very knee-jerk kind of panicked kind of a response yesterday, raising interest rates by more than 7 percentage points. That's a phenomenal reaction which reflects panic more than anything else. And therefore, the outlook for ruble remains quite shaky.
There's no doubt that Russia is in the grip of a deep financial crisis, and the Russian president is looking east now because of the sanctions from the West, really. But as far as the Russian economy is concerned, what are the steps really that Russia is looking at or could probably take to ensure that it does not go into deep depression?
See, one obvious thing for Russia to do is, which is a point that you just mentioned, is to decouple its economy to the extent it can from the West, because there it is facing sanctions and a lot of pressure. But its challenge is to, you cannot suddenly connect it much more to the East. Now, it has done more trade links with China. It wants to sell its oil and gas more to China. It can look towards Japan. The president visited India. They want to sell LNG and gas to India. But these things take time and they're not practical, and they're not, the Eastern markets cannot immediately or ever completely replace the Western markets. And you have a hostile situation with the world economic powers, that is the US and the European Union. So it's going to be quite a challenge. The currency would suffer. Already there are reports that the consumers in Russia, they are saving dollars, they're trying to buy consumer goods, and they fear a lot of inflation. So the outlook is shaky and grim. It's going to be a very challenging situation for that government.
All right, indeed. Thank you so much, Amanshu Watsu, for joining us on the program this morning and sharing your views on both those crucial subjects. On that note, it's time for a short break here on the Breakfast News on Rajya Sabha Television. We'll be right back with much more. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, the stalemate continued in Rajya Sabha for the third day in a row as a united opposition insisted on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's response to a debate on rising communal incidents. The government, in turn, lashed out at the opposition for obstructing House proceedings. The issue of rising communal violence was listed for discussion, but the standoff between the government and the opposition resulted in the washout of the business of the upper house.
Yes. But it is usually done after
The opposition confronted the government in Rajya Sabha on Wednesday. A report that Prime Minister Narendra Modi had warned his MPs not to speak out had the opposition up in arms, questioning why the Prime Minister himself was not in the House, despite repeated demands by the opposition. The opposition asserted that they will not allow the House to function unless the Prime Minister replies to the discussion on communal incidents.
देश के प्रधानमंत्री क्या सदन के आग्रह को, सदन की मांग को स्वीकारते हुए वो आएंगे या नहीं आएंगे? और मैं स्पष्ट करना चाहता हूं, अगर प्रधानमंत्री नहीं आएंगे इस सदन में कोई कार्रवाई नहीं होगी।
अगर प्रधानमंत्री जी को कुछ कहना है, अगर उनके सदस्य गलत कर रहे हैं, उनके मंत्री गलत कर रहे हैं, तो जिम्मेदारी प्रधानमंत्री जी की बनती है कि इस सदन में कहें।
I want to know from the Honorable Leader of the House, will the Honorable Prime Minister come to the House so that we can have a discussion on the matter that is contentious and on which we want to resolve and want the business of the House to continue?
The government tried to lob the ball into the opposition's court, slamming it for employing obstructionist strategies.
Sir, the Prime Minister has not announced any policy decision in the party meeting. And I have a point of order, which is, in the name of a point of order, can Mr. Naresh Agrawal every day raise a point of disorder?
आपके पास कोई मुद्दा नहीं है, आप मुद्दों के अकाल से जूझ रहे हैं, इसलिए आप इस तरह की हरकतें कर रहे हैं। ये ठीक नहीं है, आप चर्चा करिए, Sharp verbal exchanges were witnessed between the Treasury and opposition benches. Opposition members barged into the well several times and raised slogans forcing 4 adjournments in the pre-lunch session. In the post-lunch session, when truce could not be brokered, the chair adjourned the House till Thursday. The House is adjourned to meet on Thursday, 18 December at 11 hours.
Kriti Mishra, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, that was what took place in the upper house yesterday. But let's take a look now at the winter chill that has intensified in North India. Temperatures dipped in most parts, including Himachal Pradesh. The state government there is asking tourists not to visit Kullu and Manali as power and water supply are suspended for the 5th day. In Delhi, chilly and breezy conditions prevailed with minimum temperature setting at 9.2 degrees Celsius. In Jammu and Kashmir, Leh slipped to a bone-chilling minus 13 degrees Celsius. Night temperatures are in a free fall below freezing point across Kashmir. Kargil was the second coldest with a low of minus 12.8 degrees Celsius. Srinagar was at -4 degrees. Pahalgam in South Kashmir was the coldest recorded place in Kashmir Valley at -6.8 degrees Celsius. In Rajasthan, normal life remained affected with 14 passenger trains running late due to fog and mist. In the plains, Churu was the coldest with a minimum temperature of 2.5 degrees Celsius. Let's take a look now at the events lined up for today in our segment, The Day Ahead. The GSLV Mark III will be launched from Sriharikota at 9:30 am today. It will be the first experimental suborbital flight of India's latest generation launch vehicle. GSLV Mark III will take off from Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota in Andhra Pradesh. It is designed to make ISRO fully self-reliant in launching heavier communication satellites of INSAT-4 class, which weigh 4,500 to 5,000 kilograms. Bangladesh President Mohammad Abdul Hamid is arriving in India on a two-day visit. Hamid's visit comes in the backdrop of India making efforts to go ahead with land boundary agreement with Bangladesh. A Delhi court will pronounce the quantum of sentence in the L.N. Mishra murder case. On 8th of December, the court convicted 4 persons in the 40-year-old case relating to the murder of then Railway Minister Lalit Narayan Mishra. The Supreme Court will hear former Tamil Nadu Chief Minister Jayalalitha's petition in the disproportionate assets case. Jayalalitha has been awarded 4 years jail in the case. A bench headed by Chief Justice H.L. Datu granted her bail but kept it pending to ensure she files the entire paperbook and records within 2 months. The winter session of Andhra Pradesh Assembly will start today. At least 5 bills, including one that enables setting up the Capital Region Development Authority, will be taken up during the brief winter session. Moving on to some international news now. In a decision that reverses one of the most long-standing historical standoffs, the United States and Cuba agreed to restore diplomatic ties. President Barack Obama also called for an end to the long economic embargo against its old Cold War enemy.
After 50 years of hostilities, Cuba and the United States are restoring diplomatic relations. In a nearly hour-long telephone call, President Obama discussed the changes with Cuban President Raul Castro on Tuesday.
I'm told that in the Jewish tradition, one of the great mitzvahs is Pidyon Shivuim. My Hebrew is not perfect, but I get points for trying. But it describes the redemption, the freeing of captives. And that's what we're celebrating today, because after being unjustly held in Cuba for more than 5 years, American Alan Gross is free.
The shift was made possible by the release of U.S. prisoner Alan Gross, who was imprisoned for 5 years. Cuba is also releasing an intelligence agent who spied for the United States and was held for nearly 20 years. In return, the United States freed 3 Cuban intelligence agents. However, Washington's economic embargo still stands for now.
The light of hope must outlast the fires of hate. That's what the Hanukkah story teaches us. That's what our young people can teach us, that one act of faith can make a miracle, that love is stronger than hate, that peace can triumph over conflict. And during this Festival of Lights, let's commit ourselves to making some small miracles ourselves and then sharing them with the world.
The announcements bring down the curtain on a political saga that spanned the Cold War and the demise of Soviet communism. It also brings to a close the legacy of Fidel Castro, whose political, social and economic revolution transformed Cuba from a backward playground for US tourists into a third world power.
En la primera línea para morir combatiendo en defensa de mi patria.
Hailed by admirers as a hero and a dictator for critics, Castro led a guerrilla campaign that ousted right-wing Cuban dictator General Fulgencio Batista in 1959. His anti-US stance made Castro the target of a series of attempts by Washington to remove him. These included an abortive invasion attempt at Cuba's southern Bay of Pigs in 1961 by more than 1,000 Cuban exiles trained and financed by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Castro's health finally gave out in June 2006 when a series of intestinal ailment forced him to hand provisional power to younger brother Raúl Castro.
Yo realmente pensé que no iba a haber esta obra. Yo venían trabajando mucho tiempo.
During the 1980s, after years of economic struggle, Cuba began to enjoy reasonable prosperity, largely due to trade agreements with the Soviet bloc. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, the Federal Reserve on Wednesday offered a strong signal that it was on track to raise interest rates sometime next year. The decision marked a show of confidence in the US economy and alters its pledge to keep rates near zero for what it earlier called a considerable time. The US Central Bank said that it will take a patient approach in deciding when to bump borrowing costs higher. In a news conference, Fed Chair Janet Yellen implied that the Fed will not increase rates at least until April of next year. Financial markets initially interpreted the news statement as being on the dovish side, pushing expectations for an initial rate hike to October from September. Let's take a look now at what's happening around the world in our World Wrap. Bodies of 230 people believed to have been killed by the Islamic State have been found in a mass grave in eastern Syria. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the bodies were thought to be members of all Shi'atat tribe that battled the militants. The EU General Court has ordered removal of Palestinian militant group Hamas from the terror backlist. The move comes over 4 years after Hamas appealed its terror designation before the EU. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged EU to reverse it. The UN says West African countries devastated by the Ebola epidemic are at risk of hunger and starvation that could affect over 1 million people in the 3 worst hit countries. The deadly virus has killed over 6,800 people in Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone. That's it on this edition of the Bulletin. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.